Welcome back in, everybody, to a Thursday edition of Birds 365, July 11th here. We are moving right along, everybody, just 12 days out from Eagles reporting for training camp. Just talked about the tight ends. Yesterday, we did our running back preview, and on Tuesday, we did our quarterback preview. So Johnny Mack has been doing all of them on Sports Illustrated. Make sure you go over there, read all of John's articles, si.com/NFL/Eagles, one of the best Eagles sites, obviously, John, and then Ed Kratz, who we'll have on later in the show. So two of the best over there writing on SI, worth your time to go and read that for anybody. John, I want to talk about Tyler Steen with you. And I don't want to ask the question that we've been asking all off season of, will Tyler Steen start at right guard? I know that that's the question. We're going to see if he starts at right guard. We don't know yet if he's going to start at right guard. But I want to dive into the player a little bit. What are Tyler Steen's key strengths as an offensive lineman? What does he need to improve on if he wants to become an elite right guard in the NFL? He's a guy that played tackle in college. So it's technically he's playing out of position for what he's used to. What do you see from Tyler Steen? What are his strengths, at least from your perspective? And what more could he do, or what more does he need to improve on to really become elite at that right guard position?
Well, if it were Stout, he would tell you everything, but he says that about everybody.
Right.
And that's, I mean, he's not a guard. He's a tackle.
Right.
He played extensively. For those who don't know, he played at Vanderbilt for 4 seasons before he finished up at Alabama. He was a right tackle at Vanderbilt. He was a left tackle at Alabama. And if you rewind back to last season and rewind back to training camp, you'll see a lot of us who said, boy, he's struggling at guard, which shouldn't have been a surprise because he's changing positions and from what he's known. And all of a sudden, they started cross-training deeper in the camp and got him some reps outside at right tackle mainly. And he looked way more comfortable, which, again, shouldn't be a surprise. And I think there's an interesting dynamic here with Tyler Steen and Mekhi Becton because the two could flip positions or flip roles. If Tyler doesn't sort of lock down the job, all of a sudden I think probably have Mekhi Becton starting at guard, and he's the swing tackle on game day.
Right.
Whereas if Tyler wins the job, which, by the way, is what the Eagles want to happen, then Mekhi Becton's your swing tackle on game day, in theory, is probably how it's going to work out. It all comes down to his arm length and the goopiness of the NFL. He's got short arms for a 6'6" guy. So typically you want those longer arms to better help in pass protection and things like that. So there are certain levels you look for, and he didn't have it when it came to arm length. So most teams in the NFL, including the Eagles, wanted to get a look at him at guard inside. He started at the Senior Bowl. He impressed them. And they're in the middle of that process of shifting him, and now it's got to gear up because they want him to be the starter. But I always go back to Isaac Seumalo early in his career. They wanted him to be the starter at left guard during the Super Bowl season, and he struggled. And they benched him for Chance Warmack, and then they benched Chance for Stepan Wisniewski. We might have a similar situation developing here. Not that Tyler won't eventually turn into being a very good guard, but it's not easy to make that move, especially when you're that comfortable. And I think he was comfortable playing tackle and both right and left tackle as well, which is nice to have. But to give you an example, Becton is 6'7", almost 6'8". He's got 35 and 5/8 inch arms. That's really, and that's why he was back in the day the 11th pick in the draft. Tyler's 6'6". It's not that big of a difference. His arm length is 32 3/4. Something as simple as that will knock you down in the NFL's eyes, and people will project. And from another, that's why we all look at Mekhi Becton and say, guard, really? Because he's a tackle.
Yeah. A big one too.
Yeah. But, Jeff Stoutland wants to get his best players out there, and I think he's hopeful that that's going to be Tyler Steen, but he's got to win the job. If he performs poorly in training camp, they're going to go in a different direction. And there are other options as well, whether it's Matt Hennessy or Max Sharping, in sort of the Chance Warmack role, I guess. But they have a lot of bodies, but they want Tyler to win the job, and we'll see if he can do it.
John, run blocking, pass blocking, where does he seem to excel? At least where has he in his career up to this date?
Well, he didn't play much, but he was really bad in his one start in pass protection. That was the issue. And that game was against Dallas. And he admitted it. He was, when we were talking to him in the offseason, he was really bad in pass protection in that game, to the point where, remember, the Eagles, they were playing Suopeta. It was interesting. As we now know, they tried to sign Justin Pugh, by the way. This is when Cam Jurgens was out with his foot injury. They tried to sign him. They weren't able to sign him. So they never wanted to play Sua, to be honest. But he was their best option at the time. And then he had a really bad game. And they said, all right, let's pull the trigger. Let's take a look at Tyler Steen. And if he played better in that game, he would have kept the job for the entire year. But he played really poorly. I mean, really poorly. I'm trying to look it up on PFF. He had a 13.2 pass blocking grade in that game. I don't think I've ever seen one that low. It's out of 100. He gave up 5 hurries, 1 quarterback hit, 6 pressures overall, in 35 pass blocking snaps. Really bad performance. And it went right back to the bench, and they had to go back to Sua. So he played 71 snaps in his rookie season. 62 of them were in that game, and he didn't play well. So that's kind of where you are, completely unproven player.
Yeah, so it's not all proven on this offense. John, would you say the right guard is the weak spot on the whole entire offense right now?
I would say it's the weakest spot with, I don't think wide receiver 3 is very strong either.
Yeah.
Those would toggle back and forth. They probably have more options at right guard, with veteran guys who you at least know can hold down the fort if Tyler falters. So I would say they have better depth at right guard than wide receiver 3.
Yeah, a lot of good people in our chat right now are saying they're concerned with the right guard position. Guard position's what I think is the weak link on offense. I have faith in Jurgens. I'm certain Kelsey was pointing things out. So Jason feels like the right guard is the one spot on offense he's not confident about. And that makes sense. I mean, that's the guy that we don't know yet. We don't know who's going to be the starter. We think it's going to be Tyler Steen. Everywhere else is basically a sure thing, besides Johnny Mack obviously said wide receiver 3, which is another one up in the air. All right, Johnny Mack, let's dive into our good breakdown, by the way, on Tyler Steen. Let's dive into our underrated Eagles players coming into the year. We had some good input from our chatters who had some guys who they thought were underrated. So I'll bring up some of them. But John, off the top of your head, any guys right now that you think are underrated as we come into the year, people that aren't getting talked about enough?
Well, I think I always start with Milton Williams. I think is probably the most underrated player on the Eagles. I think he's already pretty good, and I think he's going to have an opportunity, more playing time, to show that he's a very good player. So I tend to start with him. And then I'm trying to think of others and throw out names. I don't think I think he's the clear winner, if
Yeah,
that's
I think
a
that's fair.
mythical
Yeah.
title. Um, I look at potential underrated players. I think there's more overrated players than underrated players. Um, most of the Eagles' upside is very young players, so it's tough to say that
Yeah,
rookies are underrated.
yeah, I agree. And then a couple of mine would be rookies. A lot of people in the chat had some rookies too. It's kind of tough to say they're underrated when they
Yeah.
haven't played a
And
damn.
even somebody like Jalen Reagor, I wouldn't say he's underrated. He hasn't played yet that
Right,
much,
so
but
he's just
I
not
think he's
rated.
got a big upside.
Yeah.
That's To me, that's a different conversation. To me, underrated would be guys who played that um, maybe don't get the credit they deserve. And I think he's the one that stands out. Cam might be number two, Cam Jurgens. I think Cam's a really good player. Um, and I know there's some concern. Understand me, you're replacing a Hall of Famer, so I get it. But the Eagles have no concerns about center. None. Zero. And that's not to say he's going to be as good as Jason Kelsey, but they know he's going to be a good center. Is he going to be a great center? They don't know that, but they know he's going to be a good one. A player you can win with. So I'd put him in the underrated conversation as well. Cam Jurgens.
Yeah, Cam Jurgens is a good one. Here's two I want to go to, and I'm not taking credit for them because they're good ones though, and I agree. JM in our chat brings up Van Sumeren and Britton Covey are my two underrated players. Those are good ones. I think Britton Covey is underrated. You hear a lot of people talking about like swapping Britton Covey out. He was the best damn punt returner in the NFL last year.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
I don't know why you want to get better. We don't need to get better at that position. We had the best one in the league. I know he doesn't wow you maybe, or he's a little undersized. Derek Gunn used to call him Crash Test Covey, which would just crack me up when we would watch the games in the green room because he does get beaten around like a pinball out there.
he
But
did as a rookie. He kind of
yeah,
learned from it.
yeah,
He didn't
he
get
did
it
learn a
didn't
little bit.
happen as much last year. Yeah, I mean, you can put Britton on there as I think they should give him a shot at receiver. They're not going to, but
I like him at wide. I like him in the slot. I don't know why they won't go to him.
the separation between the second and third team receivers in the spring between Britton and everybody else is like night and day.
Well, why don't they go to him then, John?
5'8", 172. That's what he's listed at, and he's not 5'8" and 172. They're being generous.
What's he like 5'7"? Ooh, that's he's. I got a couple inches on him.
He's kind of pigeonholed because of his size. But yeah, from the perspective of people wanting to change him out as the punt return, yeah, that's absurd. I mean, I get it from the standpoint of if you're a team trying to save a roster spot, and I know people have, Cooper can do it, and Anaya Smith can do it, although he couldn't do it in the spring. He was dropping it. I think people would be really upset going from top punt return game in football to, guys having trouble catching it. And that wasn't Cooper. That was Anias. But because they have so many people with return ability, I guess the thought process is save a roster spot, because it is, one of the problems, and I wrote about this when I was doing the wide receiver preview. Not only do they don't have anything behind AJ and Devontae, they're kind of pigeonholed on the roster by the fact that they're not cutting Anaya Smith or Johnny Wilson. It's just not how the modern NFL works.
Yeah, right. They just drafted him, exactly.
And they're not ready to play right now. So if you're keeping 6 receivers, which is what they're most likely going to do, that's 4. 2 aren't going to help you. Britton's 5, and he's the punt returner that they pigeonhole and won't even give him an opportunity to help. And then you essentially have a battle between Paris Campbell and maybe John Ross, if John Ross has anything left. That's a problem, because they're keeping those two players, and they're not going to help them this year. And I'm talking about Anaya Smith and Johnny Wilson. That ain't good.
You don't think they have any chance to maybe contribute this year?
Well, no, from the perspective of they're never going to be on the field. If both guys get hurt and they're forced on the field, it ain't going to be pretty. Maybe they make a play here or there, but
Right.
It ain't going to be pretty. Yeah, I don't like the situation at wide receiver, backup wide receiver at all. And they've kind of pigeonholed themselves. So from that standpoint, if you think about it, maybe Howie will think about moving on from Britton Covey and devaluing the punt return position and saying, well, he's not going to help me at wide receiver, so maybe I keep John Ross. And I let Cooper DeJean return punts. Maybe he can go about it that way. But I don't want to cut the best punt returner in football, and that's what he was. He was the best punt returner in football.
I'd like to see him also in the slot. I know he's small. I mean, Mike Fittery in the chat brings up a guy like Tank Dell. Now, I'm not saying Britton Covey is Tank Dell, but he is a smaller dude. I don't know. I just think maybe in the modern NFL, there's no hip drop tackle. It's not the same physical NFL as it used to be. It's still physical, obviously. It's the NFL, but it's not what it used to be. I don't know. I think he's shifty. I think he'd be great in there as a look. It's not like you've talked about many times this offseason. He's going to be what? 5th, 6th, 7th option on offense. I mean, out there at wide receiver 3. I don't think it's a big deal to put him out there. I think he's a guy that would make catches, would when his
I agree. I wish people could see the separation he generates from the slot.
Now, granted, the guy is shifty as hell, John.
Yeah, it's against backup players, I get, but I wish people could see the difference between him and everybody else. And maybe it would change their thought process. From the Eagles, yeah, I mean, they're just going to pigeonhole him because of his size, which I get. I mean, you don't see too many people his size playing. You mentioned Derek. I mean, D-Gun, he's right. You fear for the guy's life when he
crash test Covey. Yeah, man, it was.
I mean, it's Chip Kelly, big people beat up little people. It's still, as much as football has changed, it's still a sport for big physical people.
Yeah,
and it always
not
will
want
be.
to see Britton Covey getting throttled by Fred Warner in the middle of the middle of the field. That would be a tough day for Britton Covey. Let's go to our super chat here from James Carver. James, appreciate it, brother. $5. We appreciate the super chat. Everybody's high on Anaya Smith, John McMullen. Everybody in our
James
chat
James is the president of the
James
Anaya
is the
Smith
president
fan club.
of the Anaya Smith fan club. Yes, he is. Regression to the mean, J-Mac, when talking drops by Anaya. He was pressing. His mean is effectively 0.
Well, I've said from day one, he was obviously pressing. I mean, he can't be worse. But I just go back to Shelton Gibson, and I heard the same things. I mean, that poor kid dropped the football early and just never recovered. I hope that's not the case with Anaya Smith. He literally has to be better than he was in the spring. I mean, remember, he started the spring not practicing because they discovered a stress fracture at the combine. So he was working his way back. He was close. And then they got him back in there. First day, you could tell he was hyped up. And that's when he was pressing. And he dropped his first punt. And he dropped his second punt. And he finally caught one. And then he dropped another one. And then he finally got in there on offense. He's wide open. So, that's one of those things. I get Nelson Aguilar field. At least you're creating separation. Easy throw over the middle. He dropped it. That tends to wear on people, and I've seen it with Shelton Gibson. I've seen it with Nelson Aguilar. Yeah, he's not going to be like that throughout. I mean, he can't be like that throughout. He's a good player. He's proven he's a good player at the college level. I'm sure he'll settle down. I'm sure it'll be better. But short term, I'm not expecting anything from Anaya Smith and Johnny Wilson. I'm not. And I think if you are, I think, hope it's not a strategy. They're redshirt players.
Yeah.
They're developmental players. They're young players. They shouldn't have. Now, hopefully, AJ and Devontae are healthy and on the field for 95% of the snaps, and none of this matters. But I just don't like the Eagles. I talk about the Eagles pigeonhole Britton Covey. How he kind of pigeonholed himself by taking 2 day 3 receivers, because you're not going to want to cut them. And that takes up a roster spot. Now, it may not mean as much in years past, because now you have the 16-man practice squad. You can elevate guys. So you can probably get John Ross on the practice squad. You can have veteran guys on the practice squad. And if something comes up, it wouldn't be Wilson or Smith playing. They would just elevate a John Ross or somebody like that and go about it in that direction. So, the more liberal roster rules help you. But when it comes to the 53, he kind of pigeonholed himself a little bit by drafting 2 day 3 receivers.
Yeah, look, I am in your boat where you don't want to put expectations on guys like that. They are project players. They're not players who are going to make an impact this year. But I will say, everybody's high on Anais. I like Johnny Wilson. I mean, can you imagine him out there? And Sam Fleming points it out. Good job by Sam Fleming. I can't help but think of the potential of Johnny Wilson being on the same field as AJ, 2 guys that are tough to bring down, especially with the new hip drop tackle rules. I mean, he's right that does play in the favor of the receivers. You get 2 guys like big and physical like that. It's just a tough day for the cornerbacks. I mean, can you imagine our cornerbacks last year having to tackle 2 guys like that? They couldn't tackle the small receivers. Now they got to tackle AJ Brown and Johnny Wilson. Again, I'm not trying to say Johnny Wilson's going to be this great player. Hopefully he does pan out to be something. I will just say,
well, they're
running across the slot, Johnny Mack. That sounds pretty damn good to me.
There are levels to this. Johnny's like a big dude. He's got a big frame. He ain't AJ Brown.
I know.
Let's settle
saying.
down
He's a
on
tough
that.
guy to tackle when you're.
No, I mean from a physical standpoint. I mean, just because you're big doesn't mean you're physical.
A lot of body though.
A lot of yes. And all I've seen Johnny is pajama Johnny. That's not his fault, but what I would say about Johnny Wilson is he looked faster than I thought he'd be. Because he didn't run that well, and that's why
you're right.
Everybody kind of projected him to tight end, gain 15 pounds, play tight end. But he looked plenty fast enough, but I didn't get the sense that he was this big overriding physical presence like AJ Brown. The length is a problem for people, for corners, but I didn't get the imposing physicality from him, emanating from him.
Pajama Johnny is going to be what we are.
Well, that's
going forward until he does a thing on the field. He will be Pajama Johnny on Birds 365.
Hey, blame Bobby King for that, because the Eagles linebackers coach, because I loved it. That's how we described spring ball. They're all in pajamas. That's why I say that. I'm not picking on Johnny.
Yeah, no.
Everybody was in pajamas.
I just think it flows nice, Pajama Johnny.
Yeah, well, everything works with Johnny. Trust me, I'm a Johnny.
I know
everything. Everything works with Johnny. So yeah, all right, stick with it. Pajama Johnny. But Pajama Johnny looked fast. He didn't look very long. He didn't look overly physical, but get a chance to be overly physical in pajamas. However, and we happen to have in Philadelphia perhaps the best, most from a physicality standpoint receiver in football. You get that feel. I don't know how to describe it. You get that feel from AJ But that's an unfair comparison.
Yeah, top. My opinion, top 2, top 3 receiver in the NFL. Tough to compare Johnny Wilson, Pajama Johnny, to AJ Brown, but we'll go there. Johnny Mack, you brought up the name Shelton Gibson, and that has some people in the chat talking. They're like they haven't heard that name in years. Here's a funny one because I know you have interesting thoughts on this. Eduardo says, "Man, you know who was hyped up and wound up not being worth a damn? Donnell Pumphrey." Johnny Mack, I know you love the
Oh yeah,
Donnell
Donnell
Pumphrey
was.
talk.
Well, I love Donnell personally. Great kid, but yeah, it just didn't work. You talk about pajamas. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, people were so excited. I always, for people that watch the show, I temper, and I was talking about 21 personnel earlier with 2 running backs. It tends to be spring talk. It never develops when the pads come on for good reason, because somebody's got to block somebody at some point. And they rolled out what they called 21 Pony with Donnell Pumphrey and Darren Sproles at the time. Now, everybody knows Darren was not, I always would say about Darren, he was not small, he was short. Pound for pound, Darren Sproles was the strongest, and this is
Yeah.
not an
Yeah,
exaggeration.
yes. He
He
could
was the
crack somebody.
strongest player on the
Yeah.
Philadelphia Eagles. His lower body was insane when it came to a strength standpoint. But, there's some limitations when you're that short. And then Donnell was just small and not physical, and he was a great college player. But yeah, I mean, when the pads came on, Donnell sort of receded into the background, like the Homer Simpson gif that everyone always uses, just receding into the bushes, just
falling back in.
invisible.
Jeff Martin takes a shot, says he's working at Lowe's. Come on, Jeff. Come on.
Donnell is a good dude, man. He is a really, and it was this, he got a lot of crap. He's a big Los Angeles sports fan. He would always show up wearing like Dodgers gear or Lakers gear, and that did not go over well in Philadelphia, obviously, which I never understood. I mean, these guys are coming from all over the country. They don't automatically walk in and become a Phillies fan unless you're Nick Sirianni and you're the pander in chief. And Nick's actually a Pirates fan. Sorry, Nick.
As a Philadelphian, I will admit to that delusion of us.
Yeah, that is. And by the way, people should stop that.
Yeah,
but yeah, I wish
Devontae Smith don't care. Neither does Hurts. Really, they like to wear their Astros.
Oh yeah, well, and by the way, if you're good. Well, Jalen's changed a little bit. Jalen got a little bit of crap early in the process for wearing the Astros hat. Yeah, Devontae hasn't gotten much crap.
Yeah, and he's like the Boston. He's like loves the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, he loves the Celtics, and he just didn't give. I think with Devontae, it's like he couldn't give less of a what, like for people who don't, and I think it just evaporates that quickly because he literally doesn't care. And that's more people should take it that way, I think. But yeah, he loves, and Jeffrey Lurie loves the Celtics. I mean, he's a Boston guy. They all went up there. I think
it's
AJ
weird
went
because
up
I was looking at this the other day when the franchise is sold. Jeffrey Lurie, who's like Mr. Boston, who loves all things Boston, is from there.
Yeah,
they sold. The Eagles sold like right around the same time as when the Patriots.
I was trying to buy the Patriots.
Jeffrey. He was right. Yeah. And then he didn't get them, and then he pivoted to the Eagles the following year. Is that how it went?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And Jeffrey didn't have a lot of money like most. Now it's a different time.
Yeah, it was a different level then.
And I'm not talking for people like me, but he didn't have a lot of money for an NFL owner, and now it's become insane money. So yeah, but he wanted to buy the Patriots. He's a Boston guy.
James Carver drops in another super chat. He says, as president of the Anaya Smith All-Pro Before One Snap Club, Pajama Johnny is the unexpected drop star, not Anias. Interesting take there from James. He is belittling the other to lift up his own man. And Anias,
well, they're both going to be here. You don't have to worry about it. So, I mean, there's no reason to get negative on one. They're not prepared to help this team this season, which hopefully it's not a big deal. But if you look at depth, maybe we can do that on one of the upcoming shows. If you look at depth on this team, it's ironic because if you ask me, all right, what is the best starting group? And you're only talking about the duo. Say you're going to use 12 personnel as default and say CJ Uzama's the starter. I would tell you wide receiver is the best of all the positions, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. And you're going to see that in Ed and I's top 25 players and in the upcoming days, how high A.J. and Devontae are. But the depth at wide receiver might be the worst on the team. Even worse than linebacker. I always talk about the linebackers are all the same. Yeah, who cares? Somebody mentioned Ben. I'd be just as confident in Ben Van Sumeren as anybody else. I'm being a little bit facetious there, but not much.
I get, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
But not much. It wouldn't bother me at all if they showed up and said, let's get Ben a shot. Wouldn't bother me at all at linebacker. That's not necessarily a great indication for the starters, but I think the drop-off isn't that great. The drop-off between AJ, Devontae, and insert name, unless it's John Ross, and John Ross has something left, is like the Grand Canyon.
This is funny, Johnny Mack. Suplex. I want to go to Suplex in a second, but we got some funny fans in the chat today. Jeff Bone, the Bonehead. Jeff says, besides the Eagles, I'm a Lakers, Dodgers, UCLA, LA Kings fan.
Be 4 for 4 in this town.
Yeah,
Jeff,
the Rams didn't cut it for Jeff Bone, so he decided
we'll go 5 for 5 with the Philadelphia Union. You got it, but you definitely got to be 4 for 4.
Suplex says that, and this is interesting. I don't agree with this at all, Suplex. He says, I disagree on the hats. You guys think Saban would have been okay with Hurts wearing Georgia or Auburn baseball gear? No. Way different, Suplex. College allegiance is more tied to where you go to school than it is where you live, unless you live. If you're now, I could take that back. People that live in Alabama, they don't have pro sports teams down there, so they're either an Auburn fan or an Alabama fan.
Yeah, but there's not.
But people would criticize me, you're an Alabama fan, until I realized, I went to Alabama. I paid a lot of damn money to that school. You're damn right I'm going to be a fan of them, whether you guys like it or not. I think that's a little bit different than a pro sports team.
Yeah, well, college, there's a loyalty to the university, or there used to be. Now guys transfer out and play at 5 different colleges, but there's no differential between Georgia baseball and Georgia football. It's just the big G, I'm sure there might be a hat they give to the players, but I don't know. Can you? Yeah, I don't see. It's a clear demarcation line from wearing a Dodgers hat like Dell versus a Phillies hat. And by the way, if you're asking me, I mean, wouldn't you rather have the guy who's honest?
I would.
Instead of, I love Nick Sirianni. And I'm saying here,
World Series.
I love Nick Sirianni. I think he's a great dude, and I'm playfully jiving if Nick sees this. But come on, do you want the pander in chief? He's not a Philadelphia sports man.
He's not a Phillies fan. He's not a Sixers fan.
I mean, do you want that, or you want the guy who's honest? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe you live in the city. Maybe but I mean, Nick probably doesn't give up flying. He is a legitimate big time Pirates fan, or he was. And maybe he doesn't have time. Maybe he doesn't care about it. I used to be a big baseball guy, and I don't even pay attention anymore because I don't have time. He doesn't have time.
Baseball,
so maybe it shifts.
Baseball is a time consuming sport to be a fan of.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So, maybe it changes over time, but I don't like the pandering stuff. That's me personally. If people, you want to strong arm somebody into wearing a Phillies hat, come on. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Agree with you on that, Johnny Mack. Let's get to our break. We got Ed Kratz waiting for us in the green room. We appreciate Ed Kratz, so he'll be next on Birds 365. Appreciate everybody in the chat. You guys have had some really good comments today. A lot of good laughs coming out of me today. I appreciate all the good comments. I always read them, and I do appreciate each and every one of you for being here. Make sure you guys drop a like. Stay tuned. Ed Kratz from SI.com coming up next on Birds 365.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.